Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to talk about election reform. So how many of you think that the electoral process is broken and needs to be reformed? Just raise your hands. Okay, so how many of you think that it can be reformed? Ooh, only two optimists out of the group. Well, that's about like the American public. There's a poll that was taken about a couple weeks ago that asked that very question. How many people thought that the country is broken, needed to be fixed basically for the electoral process? 71% of Americans believe that the system is broken and needs to be fixed, but don't think that we can do it within our existing two-party system. In fact, in this presidential election, if you look at the sort of rhetoric between Obama and Biden and McCain and Palin, one of the things they agree on, perhaps the only thing they agree on, is that the system is broken and needs to be fixed. In fact, McCain and Obama both are like trying to out-reform the other. And one thing that Palin, I think, really brought to the McCain ticket is this idea of a reformer. So this is probably the only thing they actually agree on, is that the system is broken and needs to be fixed. But there's an even deeper frustration and pessimism in the country that kind of shocked me when I first read about this a couple weeks ago. There was a LA Times poll that was taken in early September that asked about this Alaska Independence Party you may have heard about. It's a secessionist party in Alaska that wants to secede from the Union. And there was some connection with Sarah Palin, so it was in the news all the time. Well, they decided to ask the American public more broadly about seceding from the country. 1 American out of 5, 20% of this country, would support a secessionist movement in their own state. So 1 out of 5 Americans has become so disturbed with the American political system that they're actually ready to drop out, to quit from being an American altogether. And so what I want to talk about today is the various issues that are out there for political reform and the kinds of things that can be done to change the political system. So the range of topics is huge. If you've been following the presidential campaign, I'm sure you've seen many of these. Lobbying reform, campaign finance reform, reforming the electoral process in terms of how we nominate our candidates, reforming the Electoral College, making it a popular vote, whether or not we have earmark reform that would get rid of the pork barrel politics in the process. And so there's a whole long list of things that people want to change in the political system, but the frustration you hear is that no one really thinks that we can change the process. So what I want to focus on then is how this actually can be changed. What could be done to change the system? Because political science, I think, has a few things to say about historically what has worked in the past. Well, for one thing, typically what you need to have is some type of bipartisan agreement that is very hard to push through partisan change. For one thing, our system of government doesn't really allow it very easily. That a lot of times we have divided government where one part of government, the presidency, is controlled by one party, the other institution, Congress, is controlled by the other party. If you have a case like that, like we have right now with President Bush and the Democratic Congress, there's no way that one party can push through change that they favor. And so it has to be bipartisan in its makeup, in the push for reform. So something like campaign finance reform that we saw a few years ago, the McCain-Feingold law that passed, that was one Republican, one Democrat that got behind that and really pushed it. It took them about 10 years to get it through, and it wasn't very comprehensive reform, but at least it was a step in the right direction. But then the second part that's equally important, I think, and even maybe more important, and this is where you all come into play, is that you also have to put pressure on the politicians. They have to hear from their constituents that this is something that the voters care about, something their constituents care about. If they don't think that the voters care about it, if the constituents aren't calling up their member of Congress, emailing them, telling them to put lobbying reform on the agenda, put campaign finance reform on the agenda, they'll just continue to ignore it because it's not something that they think they need to pay attention to. And so one thing that we'll be talking about later in the semester as well is how everyone should be involved in politics to make the democratic process work. Because if you're only going to the polls and voting, sure, that's good minimal participation, but to really help change the system and make it more accountable to the American people, our leaders, our politicians need to hear from us that we actually care about these reform issues. Otherwise, it's in their interest to not do anything and just to keep on ignoring the reform agenda. So thanks a lot, and we'll be talking more about this later. So.